All done, thank you. So as it stands, we are live on YouTube right now, and we'll be live on UGTV in less than a minute. Live on both platforms.
All right. Do we have everyone on?
It looks like we have the health department on right now, and they are going first.
Okay, I'm ready to begin. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to announce that due to COVID-19, we have individuals attending by way of conference call. All participants joining by phone should mute their phones when not speaking to avoid background noise. During the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak so that the public who is participating knows who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and its current guidance from Kansas Attorney General. We'll call the meeting to order. Thank everyone for joining us tonight for this special session. Clerk, please announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special meeting is being held on Thursday, June 4th, 2020 at 5:00 p.m. for a COVID update, followed by a zoning code changes to assist businesses recover during the COVID-19. Roll call. Philbrook. Bynum. Philbrook.
Here.
I got Philbrook. I got Bynum. Burrows.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Ramirez.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Kane.
Here.
Markley. Walters.
Here.
Alvey.
Here. Thank you. Our first order of business is a COVID-19 update from the Health Department. I'll turn it over to Administrator Bach and staff.
Thank you, Mayor, Commission. We're pleased to bring our weekly update with where we're at with COVID for updates going through the Health Department, and then really to make the final decisions on where we are for moving from phase 2 to phase 3. I will recognize Julian Van Loo, our Director of Public Health in the Health Department, who I see in the room, and I saw Dr. Griner on screen earlier, so it looks like there's a couple of them in there for this presentation today. So Julianne.
Good evening, Commissioner, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for having us back. Dr. Corvo is also present. She's just not with us in the room, so she's here as well. We're going to kind of give you a quick update like we have been covering the data that we've seen over the last week, and then the decision to move forward with phase 3 of the reopening. As you can see here, excuse me, we're really still watching the rates when we compare ourselves to our surrounding communities. So we're right around that 1,400 for positive cases, but our rate per 100,000 remains significantly higher than our surrounding communities, although Kansas is slowly catching up to us. When we look at rolling averages, you may remember we've transitioned from 14 to 7-day rolling averages so that we can see trends a little more quickly. You will see on this slide that we're seeing a slight uptick over the last few days in this 7-day rolling average. So, you know, it's not a severe spike from Memorial Day weekend, and we can never know 100% if it's from Memorial Day weekend, but it's probably partly attributed to that. We are paying really close attention to it, and it's something that if it continues to escalate, you know, could result in us moving backwards through previous phases. So we're keeping our eye on that. It's not super steep, but it is happening a little bit. When we look at our deaths, those remain very positive. We're down, averaging virtually 0 deaths. We've only had a death or 2 in the last several weeks, so those are looking very good. And percent positivity is kind of moving around. It's jumped up and down a little bit the last couple of weeks. It tends to spike after long weekends or even just the weekend when people come in to get tested on Monday, and we usually have higher numbers come out of the weekend. So keeping our eye on that. It's nothing super alarming right now. We're kind of hovering anywhere between 10 to 15% oftentimes in our percent positivity. That's the data. I'll pass it to Dr. Griner to talk about things.
Thank you, Julianne. So Julianne, Dr. Corvo, and I worked yesterday and last night, and still looking at curves. I just got new curves in front of me right here from the region on all this data and what we ought to do. And we really feel like there's obviously been good progress in terms of the interventions we've had so far at controlling this. In some ways, we feel a little, even though our numbers have looked worse over the past couple months than our neighbors, we feel like in some ways we're fairly stable and that we are okay to move forward right now. We're super cautious and kind of constantly worried that this could all change and we might have to take a step back. We certainly hope that's not the case. And we will be continuing to watch things closely, really every single day going forward. The earliest we could move out of this next phase, which we're calling 3.0, in alignment with what was originally the state of Kansas Ad Astra phased plan, the earliest we could move would be June 22nd. So again, we want to watch things for that 14-day incubation period timeframe. It's very, very possible we could end up saying that we're going to stay in this phase for a longer period. We just don't know. If things are stable, that's certainly not as good as if things are going down. You saw those curves earlier where clearly in a lot of ways things had gone down from where we were at a peak, but many of the health professionals and public health science folks that we're talking to both regionally and around the country feel like we may just have this sort of ongoing plateau of cases for quite some time. And I think we all know that we have a very vulnerable community. We have very vulnerable segments in the community. So if we are looking at the data and in 7 to 10 days, we're still not seeing dramatic drops, or we're seeing slight upticks, we may be in phase 3 for a while. So how is it different than what we originally did in our Restart WICO red, yellow, green zone plan? Not a whole lot. The things like gatherings of 45 people versus 50 people. So our ordinance that will come out Monday will state that mass gatherings cannot be more than 45 people. And we define that as 45 people who cannot maintain 6-foot social distancing while they're together. So that would be something like, a family having a picnic somewhere, or some other sort of gathering of multiple people who don't live in the same household, who can't maintain the 6-foot social distancing. With 6-foot social distancing and with that able to be maintained, there are a lot more things that open up and will be allowed. And we'll get into some of those details, but we actually don't have them all on paper yet. We're working with Kenmore and the legal team on getting those things together. And we'll work through tomorrow and have it all ready and probably get it out to you all, a lot of the details by tomorrow. But in the Kansas plan, the Ad Astra plan for phase 3, for example, businesses essentially had the term unrestricted attached to them. In the Kansas 3.0 plan, we are going to have language in our ordinance that says you can operate your business, but you really need to maintain that 6-foot social distancing between your employees and between your customers that are interacting with your employees and between the customers that may be interacting with each other. So there's slight differences. And again, I think everybody's aware of this. We will have an actual ordinance and mandates, whereas the state has everything that the state now has as part of their Ad Astra plan is considered recommended. That one other one that's slightly different in the Kansas phase 3.0 plan, there's talk of long-term care facilities being able to gradually reopen. They don't give a lot of details in their plan, but we feel like at this point, especially with our long-term care facility problems that we have had since the pandemic started, we want to keep those facilities closed for now. There are some states and areas of the United States who are starting to look at outdoor family visiting encounters that might be safer, things like that. We had a meeting today of our long-term care task force group, and everybody was pretty much in consensus that for now, we ought to not have those visits happening just yet. It's possible that could change even before June 22nd if we feel like it would be safe to do something like outdoor family visits. But most of the folks on that call we had today who are working at these long-term care facilities feel like the facilities don't really want to be open yet either. They are all very concerned about outbreaks that could occur if you had family members coming in and possibly bringing COVID in. So go to the next one. So again, more details. 45 individuals together are allowed, even when social distancing cannot be maintained. Swimming pools are allowed to open. We've chosen to have there be a limit on 45 people in those pool facilities. One good thing, we do not have a lot of large pool facilities, and as Mr. Cross has informed us all before, the one public pool will be closed through the season. But for private pools that we have the environmental health program oversees, there'll be a 45-person limit to those, and we will give them guidance on the distancing we want to have there. For things like camps, fairs, festivals, outdoor venues, we wanted to move this forward, and we had this in our original green zone plan as well. 45 individuals can be together when they cannot maintain the 6-foot social distancing. If more people are in an outdoor venue or environment and can maintain the 6-foot social distancing, and that business or that venue can set it up so that social distancing is maintained, those places could go to a 50% or less of fire marshal approved capacity. So that might allow some of our outdoor things in the county to get back in swing in the near term, and we'll work with them. We've worked with several already. Had a good meeting with the Speedway yesterday, Mr. Bach and I. So and then I mentioned no visitations to long-term care facilities, and I think that is it.
Do you have anything you want to add? I'm putting her on the spot. Otherwise, we're happy to take questions.
Any comments or questions from the commission?
Mr. Mayor, it's Commissioner Bynum. I've got two questions.
Yes.
And the first one is just to reiterate what I think we heard Dr. Greiner say pretty clearly, that while the state's phase is a recommendation, ours is actually by order of our chief medical officer. And that would be phase 3 that would begin on Monday, June 8th. And I just want to confirm that I heard that all correctly. My second question is with regard to testing. Where are we and what is our plan moving forward with continuing to have testing available? And those are my two issues. Thanks.
Yes, portion of the presentation. Monday, we move forward.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yes, you're correct in summarizing what Dr. Greiner was saying. Monday, the 8th, we move forward. It is not a recommendation. It's a public health order. Regarding testing, we continue to test at the health department Monday through Friday, 1 to 5 as of right now. We're not doing it yet. We're considering changing our hours because right now we're asking staff to stand out in 90-degree heat for several hours in the afternoon. And so we may have to revisit that, either shorten our hours or move to mornings. We're not sure yet, but regardless of that, we will continue testing at the health department daily for the foreseeable future, at the very least for the duration of June. And then we'll kind of figure out what that looks like throughout the summer. But we'll continue to do that. Vibrant Health and our partners with the Health Equity Task Force continue to do pop-up testing 3 days a week in the community. They've moved from 5 to 3 because they seem to be able to manage the demand for testing in just 3 days a week. So that's helped them also just with staffing and their ability to keep that going. So they've also committed to that through the duration of June. And so we're really all just kind of taking it a few weeks at a time, knowing what our commitments are, and then we'll reevaluate as we get closer to July to determine what testing will look like in our community then.
And so I would just ask that, as you've done such a great job of communicating up to this point, that, you know, communications on issues like that continue to us so that we can continue to share those out into the community.
Absolutely. As soon as any decisions are made that would kind of take us in a new direction, you guys will be kept in the loop.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I certainly want to say that we very much appreciate all of the work and the guidance that we're getting in these steps as we reopen. I just want to ask briefly, and I know it's hard to keep track of what they're doing, but on June 8th, when we move forward, how well will we align with what we know, at least at the moment, to be the plans for all the counties that surround us: Johnson, Leavenworth, Jackson, Platte? If we invented a 3-point scale with we won't align at all, some overlap, or perfect alignment, where do you think we'll be in terms of surrounding counties?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner McKiernan. That's a really good question, and I think a very important one. I think that we are not going to be very well aligned with Johnson County. I think that Johnson County continues to see a lot of pressure internally. I actually talked to Dr. Lemaster down there today. Internally, lots and lots of pressure to even move to more reopening beyond, even though the state's current thing is recommendations, some of the commissioners down there would like to see even the word recommendation removed from anything they've got going on in Johnson County. I just don't think that we feel comfortable trying to worry about aligning with something that we see as reckless and unsafe for their community. And I don't want to speak for Dr. Lemaster with him not being here, but I've been his medical partner for a long time, and he is not in favor of that as their medical advisor, but he can't control what might happen there in terms of their decisions with that. I think in terms of Kansas City, Missouri, in terms of Cass, Clay, Platte, I think we will be reasonably close to their recommendations. I think we are still asynchronous with them by a week in terms of following these 14-day incubation periods, which is a little bit of a problem. But the other thing is if you look at the curves that we're seeing just really in the last 2 days, Jackson County and Kansas City, Missouri are kind of the only ones that look like things might be upticking a little bit more than the rest of us. And so we'll have to watch that closely. There might be some reversals happening there. And of course, we're all very worried as well about what's going to happen if there are cases that come out of some of the gathering that has happened with community protests and marches and so forth. That stuff is probably going to start hitting if we do see data from that, 5 to 7 days from now. We just don't know. And we're all nervous about that, but we'll keep talking closely with those health directors and health officers in all those other counties. But I think we'll be reasonable with our Missouri colleagues. We will have a little trouble with Johnson County, but we'll keep dialoguing as best we can and continuing to push to all of those folks that we want to be a partner, but we also have to do what we think is medically and from a public health perspective the right thing to do.
Thank you. And I think that speaks to something that we all need to do, which is to make sure that we stay informed about the particulars of, in this case, 3.0, so that we can talk intelligently if someone asks us a question. And I think we should all help to put out the message that I think I'm hearing from you is we want to reopen as quickly as we believe is safe for our constituents, for our residents to do that. And so I think we all need to have a consistent message on that. Thank you again for your work.
Thank you.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Griner and Ms. Van Loo, of course, thank you again for your guidance. I have 3 parts or questions. One, again, could you tell me again the significance of June the 8th? And I took down that we may be in a less restrictive phase until June 22nd. Is that the window of time we're talking about for this next order that you intend to issue? And thank you again that this will be an order, not a recommendation. I think people know or can function pretty well in the black or white of it, but it's the gray area we're beginning to move into that may be problematic. So tell me again about what's going to happen on June 8th through the 22nd. The second thing, because I may get calls about this since we addressed Parkwood Pools some weeks ago and that we will not have a season there. So tell me again, what's the difference between opening the pools that I saw on your the presentation? And lastly, what will be the role of our police as we move through these phases? They've been very instrumental in helping to monitor and inform people. Will that still be part of their charge as we continue to go through these phases to what will be our new normal? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Townsend. So in terms of the dates, so June 8th is 14 days from when we last looked at making a change. So not exactly, because I think we ended up actually changing on the Friday before Memorial Day. So originally our plan was going to be we would change to a yellow zone or a phase 2 on Memorial Day, but because of what the state of Kansas did and our feeling that we should align with them at that particular time, we made the change from our original red zone to phase 2 in alignment with the Kansas Ad Astra plan on that Friday before Memorial Day. We're 17 by Monday. We'll be 17 days out from that last change, which gives us a full, actually more than a full incubation period of 14 days, which can be the sort of maximum time that it takes for a case to pop up after somebody gets exposed to the virus. And so we feel fairly confident having watched things that long. And then in terms of after June 8th, this next change we make to phase 3.0, we want to at minimum watch the data for 14 days. Again, that full 14-day incubation period, that would be the soonest we would move unless something very significant happens. Again, where we can align with one of our neighbors or you know, something happens that convinces us we could do something different. It's certainly possible if something really, really bad comes out of gatherings that we've seen. You know, I'd go backwards sooner, but the soonest we would probably move forward would be June 22nd. But it's very possible we could end up staying in phase 3 for some time. And you can see from the details, and of course we'll get you more, that there's quite a bit of ability for our businesses and our community sectors to get back to what they're doing. It's just kind of a new normal. And so we just don't know how long we'll be in phase 3, but the earliest we would move forward is June 22nd. The pools question and Parkwood, I think, and this was kind of a joint decision with our governmental administrative team and leadership, as well as those of us in public health, that a larger public pool was just probably higher risk than some of the other pools that are allowed to open with this limit of 45 individuals and that are under the regulations of our environmental health department. Most of those pools we think are going to be able to keep their numbers under 45 without pressure. So I think it was a size issue as well as the difference in the way those different types of facilities are used by community members. And if we really need to provide more information, because you all are getting a lot of questions, I think we can work with our environmental health team to put some specific bullet points together if that's necessary. And then the third question was
the role of the police.
The role of the police. Yes. Thank you. That I think we want the role of the police and sheriff's office to stay exactly the same. I think the coordination we've had with them and their ability to focus on education, and interaction with the community in a supportive way has been extremely successful. You know, they do follow up on leads when they get information about people potentially not following ordinances or mandates, but they always take the educational approach first. And I think we've all been extremely pleased how well that has worked, and that we've literally had no major confrontational problems or issues where they've had to start issuing a bunch of citations and so forth. So that'll continue just as it has. And hopefully, you know, that's going to continue to produce the good results we've seen so far.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Thank you. Back to the swimming pools. Are these privately owned pools that we're talking about, that people, you know, that are allowed to open under this next phase?
There's kind of a variety. Quite a few of them are private. There are things like neighborhood pools. There's hotels. There's some that are like Turner. I know Turner Community Center has a pool that they will be reopening under this guidance. But there are none that are, you know, specifically linked back to the unified government or city county here.
Okay, well, I appreciate that distinction, so that we can be prepared to respond. Well, why not Parkwood and why these others? But these are not under the purview of the unified government. Okay, and I continue to monitor. I appreciate the information that's on our COVID hub, because I'm continuing to look closely at the zip codes that encompass and surround District 1. I'm seeing the median age is still in a really younger than I expected group. And as you say, it may be the uptick from Memorial Day weekend. We haven't seen the impact of the peaceful protest yet, but I noticed that the total number of cases has gone up slightly in 101 I think 104, and looking at 102, I just can't remember. So I'm still very cautious and a bit anxious. So thank you for all you're doing and the information, and appreciate that information continuing to be put on our website and made available. Thank you.
You.
Commissioner Walters?
Yes, two questions. First, is the data that you collect detailed enough for you to make evaluations for a portion of the county as opposed to making blanket recommendations for the entire county? And secondly, when will you think a recommendation will be made or a determination about the school calendar? I am hearing that people are nervous about that, and without confirmation that our schools are going to be open, there's a lot of talk about finding alternative opportunities in adjacent counties for educating our kids if Wyandotte County is not going to open their schools. So I'd like some guidance on those two issues, please.
We'll see if Corvo's on for the second one, because she's sort of spearheading most of that work. But in terms of data available and our ability to potentially analyze sub-segments of the population, it's not easy to do with small data numbers. And even though we've got 1,400 cases now in the county, we don't have that many hospitalizations. We don't have that many deaths. And it does become difficult to have what we would consider enough statistical power to start saying, you know, oh, this zip code or even at some other level, with whether it's a city designation and so forth, we can make those determinations. And I think also, I will say that historically, public health generally has this thing where you have to sort of follow the jurisdiction that falls under your ability to work as a public health program. I think that if you look historically at how outbreaks and epidemics have been handled in the United States and really across the globe, you always have this problem of people wanting to, you know, to make decisions that are tailored, but it's constantly a balance between trying not to limit people's freedoms and trying to control the spread of something that actually, if you don't limit freedoms to some extent, you won't control that spread. So I think that if we look at what we've done the last 10 or 12 weeks, we've kind of been ahead of what a lot of other local jurisdictions around us have done. That's probably made some people unhappy, and they might think we overdid it. But I really would like to thank Mayor Alvey for even pushing some of us on the public health side to say, hey, we have to take action. And I think that's proven to be, I think it's proven to be very valuable to our county. And this will be something we'll probably be talking about a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But I don't think we've got the statistical power to start making decisions. If we had 10 times the cases we have and 10 times the hospitalization, then yeah, maybe we could. But with lives on the line still, I think we've got to work as a county in a unified way, even though there's going to be people who aren't going to want us to do that.
Yes, hi, this is Dr. Corvo. I apologize that I couldn't be in the health department this afternoon. We continue to meet regularly with our education subcommittee, and that is broken up into 4 different small groups. And that's broken into the early childhood education and child care section, as well as the elementary and secondary sections, and then also higher education. Each of those sections is looking really carefully at kind of how we're going about these now phases, and we'll be issuing guidance. It is our every intention to reopen the schools in a safe way, and so we're really preparing for how to reopen in the safest way possible, instead of contemplating not reopening. And so I think that we're really trying with everything we've got to do that. We realize that especially for parents, maybe single parent households, kids who may not have as much access to the internet and other resources and such, it is really stressful not being in school. And we realize that this has been a major issue for so many families across the metro, not to mention giving up a year of school and maybe getting behind. For some kids, it's just going to be difficult for them to make that up. So we're making every effort to do that. I know that there's also a larger state effort with many folks from across Kansas thinking about reopening schools. I'm guessing that there will be some guidance that is issued from that effort. I believe that is going to go pretty quickly. I hope it's done in a swift manner, because I know that these questions are starting to arise, but we thought that it would be wise and YNDOT to issue some guidance as well. We hope to have something out within the next week or two. Happy to field more questions about that if necessary. Thanks.
Well, I might follow up. When you meet with these educators, do they give you advice on when they need a decision in order to respond to their internal needs?
They do. That's a great question. There's especially for the early childhood folks and we never, of course, closed daycares and whatnot, and they consider themselves to be sort of one and the same. And so they've wanted recommendations and guidance, yesterday. And so we're putting those out even by the end of the week for the early childhood education piece. The others, it's very interesting. I was pushing really hard, although myself, a medical school educator, I don't know as much about what's going on, for school-aged kids, and they said, well, let's wait another week or two. We're really interested in what's going to come from this large group in the state, and they're wanting to make sure that our guidance at least takes into account what's going to come out from the larger state effort. I'm interested. It sounds like you're getting a lot of push to know as soon as possible, and I can certainly understand that.
Well, I think the push I'm getting is if the adjacent counties open and we do not, that will hurt our school districts. That's what I'm hearing.
I appreciate hearing you say that, and I will take that back to our education committee. Thanks.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kane?
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo what Jim said. I've got this new superintendent asking me questions because she's new, and that their board wants to know what's going on. And I also like to know who is relaying all this stuff to the other municipalities. Edwardsville's committee doing, and maybe they should hear some of this so they can have some input on what's going on. And back to what Jim said, I understand some of the stuff that we're doing, but if the other schools open and we don't, that would be absolutely terrible.
So Commissioner, I can answer the one question about the concern that does Edwardsville and Bonner Springs, they joined and have been joining since the beginning of the pandemic in our daily calls with the health department and with other, anchor institutions across the county. And so these issues have been coming up through them. That's not just, it's Mayor Harrington and Mayor McTaggart, as well as their administrators. So that's how that information is getting back and forth there. As far as the others, I could let Aaron, Dr. Corvo, or Dr. Griner respond.
And I know we've got several of the educational leadership folks on that task force that Dr. Corvo's got together. And I will say this, we probably haven't gotten this across. The state put this large group together to work on a statewide plan for how things would reopen or be handled at the state level. There's like 90 people on that in that group. We put this task force together, what, a month ago, Dr. Corvo?
Yeah.
And the details of these draft plans right now are really solid and really detailed. We've showed them to Wyandotte or Johnson County, and they don't have anything like this. They're again 3 weeks behind us at least in terms of. I shared the draft plans with people in Wichita who just put a committee together Tuesday, and so we're ahead of the state, we're ahead of Sedgwick County, we're ahead of Johnson County on this. And I think that what will happen is those guys will all take chunks of our plan and have it in their plans. And now I don't know that we need to go waving a flag about that everywhere, but in the end, I think we will, if we can get that across to our educational leaders in these districts and these school boards somehow in a humble way, I think it will end up making us look like we were sort of leaders, and I think doing things that are both beneficial to the kids and not harmful to the districts while preserving safety. Anything else, Corvo, on that?
I think that's helpful. You know, the area superintendents are part of this local effort to put guidance out, and so I just want to make sure that you all know that. And I apologize if we needed to do further updates prior to now, but I believe Dr. Greiner is right that the drafts that I've seen at this point are really very solid. I believe that within a week or so we will be able to blast that out.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Greiner, Dr. Corvo, Julianne. I'd just like to end with a comment that I think that the fact that we got out in front of this and frankly stomped on the virus fairly vigorously early on has had a tremendous effect in controlling the spread. That if we had not instituted these restrictions as early as we did and done them as it were piecemeal, there would have been much broader spread and less awareness. But I think that the fact that it's like any fire, the more you stomp on it, the better it is to control. I think that's what happened here with the virus. But at the same time, we have to preserve this victory, and we have to continue to maintain our social distancing, follow all the guidelines. And my concern is that more and more people, as they see these restrictions being lifted, interpret this as the virus is over. And in fact, it is not. We know that, and we have to continue to bring that to our public awareness. The dangers of schools opening too quickly is that these students who may be asymptomatic can carry the virus home, and then they're going to infect their families, which again will spread. So it still comes down to the fact that we have to have much more vigorous testing and much more contact tracing. That's really how you limit the spread. Failing the capacity to test and to contact trace, we have to use much more blunt weapons, which has been the stay-at-home order. So having said that, let's thank you again for your update. And now let's go to our next item, which is COVID-19 Ordinance and Resolution in support of businesses recovering from the original stay-at-home orders. And I'll turn this over to Administrator Bach.
Thank you, Mayor. So this item we previewed last week as a reaction to our businesses being shut down or socially distanced. Limits the number of seating they have in many areas, particularly those restaurants and such. Trying to put together some leniency so businesses could operate out into public spaces, to sidewalks or potentially parking lots. Mr. Han, our planning director, went through kind of what they were thinking last week and putting this together. And we have that information to go over this evening with you for consideration. I will note you would all ask for this to be out by 5 o'clock yesterday. Mr. Han did have that information put together. He distributed it to our office, and it was a failure on our part to recognize some things. We did not get it distributed out, so it went out today. So I apologize for that, but we will try to go through this in enough explanation and presentation from Mr. Han so you have a good understanding for the information that's being put forward. I think it is fairly straightforward in the way it can come across. With that, I will recognize Gunnar Hand in planning.
Thank you, Mr. Bach. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do have a presentation that I can walk through. It sort of lays out our thinking. It's for those of you who saw the last one, it's an elaboration essentially of of our last presentation with a little more detail into the actual resolution and ordinance. So as Mr. Bach mentioned, this is, well, first of all, can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Sorry. Always want to check, make sure Zoom's doing its job too. So again, the purpose of this is essentially to help with the aid in the economic recovery after the COVID-19 stay-at-home orders. We want to make sure that businesses aren't just opening up, but they're doing it safely, in large part following up on the conversation that we just had in the previous agenda item. So our thinking is twofold for a resolution and an ordinance. And I will note that there will have to be a second ordinance that will follow up as it relates to Chapter 27, as those sections of the ordinance that get adjusted have to go through the Planning Commission. So we will have a follow-up ordinance as well, either next month or potentially we'll do an emergency meeting with the Planning Commission, and we'll discuss that at our Planning Commission on Monday, how they want to move forward with that. But what we've done is we've created a resolution that suspends enforcement of specific sections of both Chapter 27 and Chapter 32, Chapter 32 being mostly stuff that happens inside the right-of-way. And then we've created a ordinance, the bulk of which is addressed in Chapter 32. So the vast majority of what is going to be discussed tonight is going to be included in what's before you today. Before I dive too much deeper, I did want to make sure that everybody understood that we did have a quick turnaround here, and I wanted to acknowledge all the work that's been put in by the CAO's office, legal, police, fire, public health, public works, transit, and others. This did get around to the entire UG family. We did get a lot of comments back from other departments, and we were able to put that together. Specifically, the lead on my staff was Michael Farley, who's with us tonight, to answer any specific questions we might have about the nitty-gritty, as well as our specific legal counsel for urban planning and land use, Patrick Waters. So thank you to everybody who did put in the work on this ordinance and resolution and turned it around. We think it covers everything that we need. We think we've put in a lot of detail, and we think it's ready if you're willing. And so with that, again, I just wanted to quickly touch on the resolution essentially suspends enforcement of these specific sections between now and the end of the calendar year. For those sections that it suspends in Chapter 27 that will follow up with in, let's say, a month with an additional ordinance, those will be suspended while we essentially provide additional standards. Now, and I'll go into that in a little bit detail, but those specifically relate to mobile vending and farmers markets. So we'll essentially not enforce anything related to mobile vending and farmers markets until we can move forward with that ordinance update. I will say that I think that the reason we decided to include that is currently the mobile vending ordinance only has one registered food truck in the entire county. I do believe that the current mobile vending ordinance has over-legislated restrictions to the point where no one is participating. So we did want to provide some mechanism to open that up. Again, we'll follow up quickly with additional standards. And then additionally, for farmers markets, there are a couple of farmers markets who came in the last month or two who wanted to operate outside of what is currently allowed. Essentially, they are in a residential zone without an SUP, and we have sort of asked them to come back retroactively. This would essentially mean they can keep operating, and then whenever we institute the ordinance, we'll come back with administrative review. But tonight, again, we wanted to focus on, let you know that that's what the resolution says, but we really wanted to focus on the ordinance in Chapter 32, which again focuses mostly on how businesses can essentially spill over into the public right-of-way, on-street parking, or what we're calling parklets. You may have heard that term before, as well as the front and side yard setbacks, if there are any, as well as off-street surplus parking, if there is any. And so let me just go through the presentation. I'll be happy to take your questions at the end. This is only for specific businesses. They're listed here. They're also listed in the ordinance. It started primarily as a focus on restaurants and other eateries. And then we sort of asked ourselves what other uses could easily be folded back into the business at the end of the night. Which ones were, let's just say, potential nuisances on the sidewalk or not. And then additionally, we wanted to think about also public safety. Police had some interesting comments about what some of their concerns about essentially having sidewalk sales. And so we tried to measure those with, again, the requirement to allow businesses who can and need to abide by social distancing requirements can essentially expand the amount of, let's call it leasable space, if you will, into the public right of way. And so those are the enumerated ones. We specifically call out that no repair work can happen. We are not allowing electronics, or this ordinance does not propose to allow electronics or some issues we've had in the past with appliances being pulled out into the public right of way or onto the sidewalk and back in. We also felt that if an office business wanted to pull out their desk and chairs and operate outside, that they could do that. We didn't see any problems with that, again, on a daily basis. And then we also felt like there might be an opportunity here for additional nonprofits to potentially occupy some of that space that we enumerate here in just a second. In the ordinance, we provide a bunch of different standards that we wanted to work through. Again, everybody has to have a business license or 501c3 status as per the nonprofits. We created a nexus, so it's not just people rolling up to the sidewalk and hawking their wares. You have to be an existing business to then effectively spill out of. And then we essentially apply that sort of space to 4 specific areas, and we kind of group them in 3 in the ordinance, but they're enough to mention the 4. So we're talking about, again, sidewalks, front and side yard setbacks, on-street parking or parklets. Again, those can be temporary or semi-permanent. I'll go into some more detail about that, as well as off-street surplus parking. So surplus being the distinction there, which is not required parking in an off-street space. If you think of some of our more suburban commercial areas, they often provide more parking than our parking requirement, our parking standards require. So any of those surplus spaces could, at their will, could potentially be occupied by sort of offsite sales. Basically, we feel like aside from the requirement and anything above and beyond that, a business can self-regulate how many spaces they want to take away essentially from their customers. And then we applied a bunch of different safety standards accordingly. So obviously it can't go anywhere. If you think about sidewalks, we maintain clearance for ADA. We provide buffers for different street furniture. Not all streets have street furniture. In fact, most of those are potentially on the more closer to downtown. Again, we put in stipulations for 6 feet of social distancing across the board pretty much. You can't occupy an ADA parking space. You can't occupy a transit anywhere in a transit zone. We talk about sight lines and sight distances at corners. So those parklets, which we'll again talk about here in a little bit more, have to be cannot be within 15 feet or 20 feet, I believe it is, of intersections. Fire wanted us to add 15 feet for any hydrants, again, including bus stops. And we specifically enumerate fire, public health officers, code and zoning enforcement officers are allowed to essentially enforce these different ordinances. So because this is a blanket ordinance across a very diverse county with multiple different types of typologies, we felt like it will essentially be an effort where all of these officers have to move forward and respond to different issues as they arise. And we think that that's probably, although a lot of legwork involved in that, we think it's the only approach that makes it work. Otherwise, we're going to spend forever trying to enumerate every specific instance that could possibly happen. We feel like we did a pretty good job with what we've got here, and that it will. But I think we did want to make sure everybody was going into this eyes wide open, understanding this is not an effort where they ask for permission. This is an effort where we enforce and they ask for forgiveness. And so, again, not every street looks like this, but this is generally how we think about the public right-of-way as we moved in to talk a little bit in more detail about sidewalk cafes and on sidewalk retail. But essentially, there's the frontage zone, which is where we're hoping a lot of those sidewalk cafe uses happen. The pedestrian through zone, that's that 4 feet of clearance for ADA. And then typically street furniture curb zone. There are pretty much few, if any, enhancement buffer zones, but that's just, again, a part of a diagram that we've been using as we reference the National Association of City Transportation Official Standards for Parklets. We thought this was a good diagram to kind of understand how we're trying to generally keep throughway for pedestrian access, and then sort of use the space closer to the buildings and maintain sort of buffers for what typically happens on the edge of a curb for street furniture, street trees, things of that nature. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is sidewalk front yard setbacks. Again, we're talking about 4 feet for street furniture, fire lanes, and others. We are allowing, we sort of, I don't know if we allow, but we sort of, in a way, stay silent about alcohol sales. Our thinking is that any business who wants to provide alcohol sales either at a sidewalk cafe, on their front or side yard setback, in an off-street parking spot, is going to have to go through, because we don't allow it now, is going to have to still go through ABC. And when they go through ABC, they're going to have to come essentially to get that license to expand where they sell alcohol. They will have to go through police. They'll have to go through us. So it's going to go through a process anyway. We wanted that process to determine whether you can or can't do it. Again, it's sort of opening things up now and allowing people to seek those approvals. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody who has a sidewalk cafe is going to be able to sell alcohol. You know, it's going to have to be sort of roped off area specifically connected to the building. And for that reason, the one place we do enumerate where sidewalk alcohol sales are not allowed is Parklets, because you would have to essentially cross that pedestrian zone to get to that on-street parking space. And again, I think there's everything currently either in the sidewalk or in that section of the public right-of-way has to come back in at the end of the day. So this can look like sidewalk cafes. This could look like on-street, different types of on-street retail, or this could look like open air markets. Now, we've seen a lot of cities across the country allow restaurants to essentially turn into markets if they want, and that's sort of enumerated in this ordinance. Or other businesses sort of function where they don't let people inside anymore. They're just letting people approach their quote unquote counter. And maybe they have some seating out, again, with the different standards enumerated. The second one is this, again, the on-street parking or parklets. Right now, the ordinance enumerates that each building can only have one parklet. So there might be multiple tenants in a building. It's up to that property, that landlord and or those businesses to decide who gets that one parklet, and potentially it switches per day. But again, we wanted to let the market decide how they handle that, because we didn't want to start to get into, we just felt like it got real complicated, because if we did say each tenant got one, then, you know, it could potentially be 5 tenants in a building and there might not be 5 parklets. And so we just wanted to make sure that there was one per, and we'll let the market decide who gets to move forward with that parklet. Again, there it is, the 20 feet from an intersection corner, again, to main site distance and safety. A lot of these on-street parklets, there's a lot of safety measures built in, again, to NACTO standards, which are these. You know, we require some sort of separation between the path of travel and the parklet space. We require sort of curb stops on either end. So that essentially, as you can see in this image, there's you know, a car in front of you and a car parked behind you. But again, some sort of separation. This diagram, if you will, is sort of more of a permanent type situation. But that's not to say that there couldn't be some sort of temporary solution as a parklet. Parklets actually started off as an idea of just reclaiming public open space dedicated to cars for people. It's evolved and transformed into sort of something that looks more like this in a lot of different cities, where you have sort of a flush to the curb platform, again, something containing you inside, and then curb stops on either end, potentially adding bikes and into stuff. So essentially we maintain that in this ordinance as proposed to one parking space. And then when we look at off-street surplus parking, again, focusing on those spaces that are not required by code and or conditions. Sometimes when we do conditions of approval, we'll enumerate some other type of parking agreement. So we didn't want to get into that either. It's anything that they build above and beyond what we've required in our approvals. That's what they can use. We thought about doing, percentages of required parking, but then it just, it turned into another sort of complex issue that we felt we didn't need to necessarily get into at this point to get this thing moving. At this point, we're thinking that off-street surface parking is also a situation where it's only temporary. But if you think about it, we're coming up on fireworks season for July 4th, for instance. To break down one of those tents every day might be enough, or might be a little too much. But right now, we're thinking that it will be temporary and you bring it in every day. If we wanted to potentially talk about allowing in this situation something more semi-permanent, I think that would be something we want to discuss at the meeting today. But we felt that for now, it would just be temporary to be fair to all the other situations. Again, not everybody has off-street parking. Not everybody has on-street parking. Not everybody has side or front yard setbacks. So we're trying to create some level of commonality amongst all the different typologies. But again, it's the same thing. It has to allow, it can't be on ADA parking. It has to allow sort of the different, it can't be in an access aisle. It has to be in those parking stalls. And we leave it up to them to decide how they do that. So this could look like anything from different stalls in an off-street parking space to, again, this is sort of a more, let's call it semi-permanent. Not sure if you had any strong opinions on this, but again, as of right now, it's written as only temporary. And then this, the resolution as well as the ordinance does talk about mobile food vending. And I'll get to what we're going to talk about in chapter 27 and have to do as a follow-up to this. But as of right now, we're thinking for mobile vending, we want to maintain those food trucks on, and then actually we want to maintain those food trucks on streets that are up to 40 miles per hour. And then again, fire and I think police also mentioned for public safety reasons, keep those people queuing away from the public road. And then obviously 6 feet of social distancing therein moving forward. And that can be anything from what you would think of when you say mobile vending or food truck to the plethora of different mobile vending food carts and stalls and other things that have emerged in sort of the food mobile vending revolution that's occurred sort of really around us. And again, for us, we see the opening of the relaxing of the enforcement between now and the time of that new ordinance should be okay, because these businesses, it is enumerated that these businesses have to get a business license before they go out. So you can't just walk out there and start doing hawking hot dogs. You do have to get a business license. And when you get a business license, you do have to go through a process where we review it. So we think that we can kind of catch these things as they come on, see and sort of gauge what interest there is out there in the market currently, and then potentially adjust if we have time, but generally move forward with the ordinances in quick order shortly thereafter this one. I mentioned earlier that we feel this is sort of a campaign of asking for forgiveness and enforcement. To that effect, we also think that this is a huge or certainly a significant public outreach campaign that has to be required. As such, we've developed sort of a bifold. This is an 11 by 17 PDF that we could easily get out into the world that enumerates, again, sort of the sidewalk, the setback, and the off-street scenarios that we elaborated. It has some of the standards included in there. We've made sure that it prints out in black and white and color. All the margins are okay. So you basically just have to hit print and then fold an 11 by 17 sheet in half, and you got yourself a pamphlet that you can distribute or do it digitally. And so it covers the majority of, again, specifically just the sidewalk, off-street, and setback requirements that we've talked about. We're thinking about developing a second sheet to talk about mobile vending and farmers markets when we follow up with the ordinance regarding chapter 27. And again, so next steps, we've reached out to David Reno. He's aware that when this thing moves forward, we got to do some outreach across the community. We're going to coordinate with all the different enforcement officers that I enumerated earlier, just to kind of bring them up to speed if and when this gets approved on what that looks like and to be ready for it. We've essentially written in there that they can walk out there and if you will, write conditions immediately on the spot if they see issues. So as issues come up, you give us the address, we'll send a guy out there and they can immediately say, do this, don't do that. You can't do this, you can't do that. And so that's the approach that we're taking, which is up for conversation. And again, this second emergency ordinance will move forward as fast as we can. But again, any changes that happen to Chapter 27 have to go through the Planning Commission. And so that's the one little hiccup about this emergency ordinance moving as fast as possibly can. And with that, I think that's my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Commissioner Bynum?
Thank you. A couple of questions. So if we're all in consensus or straw poll agreement with this tonight, then these ordinance changes would be on our June 11 agenda. Would that be correct? Or when would they come forward to us?
Want to double check with legal, but I believe that it would go into effect as soon as it is published, if approved tonight.
It could be approved
so
tonight and then be published next Thursday and go into effect.
So this is a voting meeting tonight?
Correct.
Okay, which is different from our usual special sessions where we don't take votes. Next question. Do mobile vendors and farmers markets collect and remit sales tax? Does anyone know?
I believe they do.
It just seems like a small drop in the bucket, but if that would, you know, perchance increase sales at mobile vendors and farmers markets, that could be helpful to our bottom line. And then I would just ask that these changes be disseminated through both livable neighborhoods and our NBRs, because our NBRs tend to act as a go-between, if you will, when they find themselves dealing with vendors and merchants who might be doing these things prior to this change in the ordinance, at which point would not have been allowed. And so we need to make them very aware that, you know, if and when they begin seeing changes in the behavior of businesses in this way, that it's okay.
Absolutely, Commissioner Bynum. And again, I forgot to mention earlier on when I was listing all the different departments, the Neighborhood Resource Center and Mr. Talkin and his staff were definitely a critical part of this review. So, but yes, you're correct. We'll work with Livable Neighborhoods and Andrea Genero, and we'll push that out as part of the outreach campaign for sure.
And Commissioner, mobile vendors are required to collect sales tax. So they're continuing to do this, they should do that and add to it. Also, just for a point of clarity, tonight's meeting is a special commission meeting. It was not called a special session. This was called the regular special commission meeting. It was just assigned at 5 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to say something I've never said in the 7 years that I've been on the commission. I'm really upset tonight that last week, I know for one, I think there were several other commissioners who were concerned that we get this information well before the meeting, and to get it today and to go through something and be asked of this detail to act on it tonight, I think is just regrettable. That's the word I use. So I, for one, am not ready and would not vote on this tonight. I mean, there'll be a vote, I guess. But for instance, when you look at this resolution, particularly in section 27-609, that takes away a lot of the protections and safeguards for the residents in the area, with no guidance. If nothing else, this particular resolution and any ordinance that purports to replace it or better define it should be viewed at the same time, in my opinion. So I know we want to get things going again from an economic standpoint, but what we're doing pertains to the whole of Wyandotte County, just not certain sections. I was of the opinion we're really going to focus on trying to get more outdoor areas for people to eat and all this type of thing. And my mind was more on the western part of the county, where we have a collection of restaurants and bars and certainly more space to work with. But we're not dealing just with one part of the county. We're dealing with all of it. So I have some particular questions, but I guess it boils down to, particularly with the resolution, that we remove these restrictions and have nothing in their place. I don't believe that's warranted. There was a lot of discussion and work with people who were doing the mobile grocery deals in the mobile markets to make sure that they were available, but did not infringe overly so in a residential community. So I'm just really upset that, you know, today we're looking at something we should have seen way before this to give it more detail and time to consider. So that's all I got to say about it at this point. And that's not a knock on anyone who worked on it, but if we know we're going to have this meeting, then we shoot ourselves in the foot by not giving us as the commissioners enough time to respect what's done and really get into the detail of this in the best interests of our constituents. Thank you.
And Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you, Mayor. Gunnar, thank you for your presentation this evening. I, for one, am pleased to see something like this moving forward. A couple of questions and then a comment, if I may. Anything about the smoking ordinance brought up in reference to the areas in which we are talking about the expanded business opportunities? Anything in reference to the smoking ordinance?
That is not specifically enumerated in this ordinance resolution, but it would still stand as, again, I think the way that we're looking at it is you're expanding your footprint into the public right of way. And so that effectively still applies to all the rules that were included therein. So public smoking ban in areas of, you know, would still apply. We could specifically enumerate that if that was an issue. And we had done that on some particulars just to be fully clear, but we had not included that in this.
Well, thank you for that. I hope we can get some resolution to that as whatever we may choose to do. Second of all, we keep talking about parking. It seems to me that in any discussion we have, parking has been an issue in reference to consumer utilization of a business. I, for one, am pleased to see outdoor opportunities for us to enjoy our restaurants. Every one of them are unique, and they deserve an opportunity to provide their wares to the public that want to utilize their facilities. So I'm excited about this. I think some of the drawings you put up were quite elegant. In the travels that I do, I'm always excited to visit some of the small communities as well as some of the downtown areas of large communities to see how things are laid out. I know we don't have a lot of transportation options in our community, but I would hope that when we start talking about the parking issue, that we look at opportunities for walkability also. And if we have to park on some of the further distances, that we offer opportunities for people to visit those facilities. The next thing I'd want to say is, what is the turnaround time? If somebody wanted to apply to do this, it's one thing to have an ordinance in place. It's another thing to hold it up going through the process and they not be allowed to utilize that until 4, 5, 6 weeks later. I would hope that if we implement an ordinance that the public and or the proprietor would have an opportunity to engage in that pretty quickly and not be held hostage while we just put them in the queue, I guess, so to speak.
There is no administrative review for any of this.
That is what I would call a very forward-thinking approach. And again, I really appreciate your presentation this evening. I'm excited. I think there's areas in our community that will benefit greatly. I think there are some small entrepreneurs who will have a chance to expand their business a little outside and add a little bit of color and clarity to our community. I would hope that we would have some kind of criteria in this ordinance or consideration moving forward, that it not just be a table with a couple rickety chairs and a trash can, that we look at doing it properly and in a manner that is respectful of the customer base of our community.
I think that's why we've been pounding on the public outreach portion of this, is to communicate businesses what the true intent is. And the enforcement as well is going to be such a big part of it, just to make sure everybody's doing it the right way. But we agree. We think this is an opportunity for not just social distancing, economic development, but placemaking and community and culture.
Well, I sincerely thank you for your presentation this evening, and I look forward to participating in any way that I can, but frequenting some of these places. I really enjoy that opportunity, so thank you.
Okay, so we have an opportunity now. Do we need two separate resolutions, one for the ordinance and one for the resolution?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'd entertain a motion for approving the COVID ordinance.
Mayor Alvey, there are two commissioners with their hands up. We have Commissioner Philbrook and Commissioner Townsend.
Okay, I see it now. Thank you. Commissioner Philbrook.
Yes, so as I'm reading down through this, because I worked all day today, so this is my first chance to read down through this. And the review and sunset section 32-103, and of course it talks about it sunsetting December 31st, 2020 on sections 32, the two that you've outlined. And that it could either be extended or taken back by then. But here's my additional legal question on this, is if the commission sees this as becoming a problem, can we not take this back and undo what we did?
Absolutely. It can be changed at any time.
Well, Patrick, I just want people to understand that things sometimes we choose to do because we're thinking that we're doing the right thing, sometimes just don't work out. And I want everybody to understand that we have that option to pull back on it or make some changes. That's all. Thank you.
And Commissioner, I would also note, heaven forbid, if we do go back into the red zone, this all goes out away too.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to go back to the resolution and ask a few specific questions. So when I'm looking at the resolution under item 1, and it talks about mobile markets and mobile vending in residential communities, and section 27-6097A3. The intent here is to suspend dates and times for each stop. Tell me what that would look like now, because I'm looking at this. Does this mean that these mobile vendors can be at any stop for as long as they want in a residential district?
Well, there's two things I would clarify. There is one mobile vendor in all of Wyandotte County. So we're talking about one truck currently. Any new truck that came in because we've opened this up and potentially brought in new businesses would have to go through a review process where we would enumerate what we're thinking in the new ordinance. But as it reads now, you are correct. This is essentially laxing enforcement or suspending enforcement of the current ordinance, which I think it only allows for 4 hours at a time in residential districts. I think one of the reasons why we specifically went ahead and put these in the resolution as opposed to holding for another resolution/ordinance to go along with 27 was two parts. One, because we did add the information about they have to get a business license to move forward, which triggers a review. And also because there's only one of them, but thirdly, there was an instance that came up in the last month where a mobile food truck was invited to a block party out in Piper, and it was the one food truck that is registered with my department. And they weren't able to go and sit at the street and provide their wares, but they could essentially go and drop it off, which means they weren't mobile vending, they were just delivering food. So we took that instance, and essentially our thought was we would allow people to do that. Now in the ordinance, our thinking is that we are going to create a standard where you're allowed into residential districts only if you're invited, i.e. a block party or something like that. And then add in new standards for time of day where you could be invited to said location, with one caveat where they could potentially pull up to like a park or be in a parking lot with a farmer's market of a church or of a old folks home or what have you. But you're reading that, your concern is accurate.
Let me go to another section there. This is 27-6097A31. And it talks about suspending the requirement for the vending operation to take place at the farthest point from the nearest property line. What are we doing away with here? I know there's a requirement that they be so far from a residence. Is that what we're talking about getting rid of now?
Well, the next one is the 500 feet from residential districts, which essentially eliminates most commercial properties. But that one in particular, Michael, can you help me out with that one? And or Patrick?
I read it to say that if you look at a property as a square, that the mobile vendor needs to be, if it's in a parking lot, that it needs to give sufficient space for like circulation of vehicles inside there. And so it being like essentially pushed away from that property line. But that's just I don't know if you have a different read on that.
Commissioner Townsend, our thinking is essentially to open it up and be much more permissive with mobile vending in general as we move forward with the ordinance for 27, which again, because I think our one mobile vending operator will demonstrate that it's really hard to operate that type of business with all the regulations we've applied to them. Our thinking is our main standard currently in the way that we're thinking about 27, which again is not a part of this ordinance, is that we're essentially going to allow mobile vendors, a food truck, to pull up to any commercial street so long as it's not in front of an existing restaurant.
But I guess what my concern is as I read this, and this goes back again to not having this really in a timely fashion, is that we're taking off the gloves for this truck or any others in residential areas. And when this was drafted, I know there was a lot of discussion about how big these things are, where they are, how close they are to residences. And it disturbs me that if we're going to change those safeguards, we don't at this time have an ordinance which says what it can do. So that's the concern that I have overall on this.
I think that's valid, and I think if you wanted to, we could pull out those sections from this resolution and just apply it to a resolution. Again, it was the philosophy that we thought we would go with on this draft, if you will. But again, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we could pull the sections that give you heartburn right now, again, admittedly, so that we could align them directly with. The other thing we could potentially do, again, I'm spitballing here a little bit, Mr. Waters, is we could delay those sections to tie them to the other ordinance, but approve it all now, if that's possible.
I guess I would want to confirm with Ken, could an oral amendment be made and then a revised resolution be submitted to the clerk with those amendments?
Well, I appreciate those were just 2 or 3. I've got about 10, 7 or 8 of these. And so I would prefer to see, like I said, a resolution that talks about 27 with the sister ordinance that you're proposing. I just think it's ill-advised to take the gloves off here and not have any kind of restrictions or any kind of recourse for the general population we're trying to serve. At the time this was done, we were still in desperate need of a grocery store, which is now rising as we speak. And there'll still be a need for this type of thing. But I think it's ill-advised now to remove these things and not have a substitute that all of us can see and understand. So that's my position on that. So thank you.
I would just make the clarification that there are some resolutions that we're requesting to be suspended in Chapter 27 that are specific to mobile vending, food trucks, and farmers markets, which are not addressed in this ordinance in front of you. But there are some sections in Chapter 27 that do specifically talk about allowing business to essentially spill out into the public right of way. So we'd want to make sure that those continue to stay in the resolution. But if you wanted to pull everything out about mobile markets and food trucks and even farmers markets, if you will, I think that's.
Well, if we pulled everything that I have a concern about mobile markets, food trucks, I don't know what would be left really.
Well, specifically exterior sales on private property in commercial districts. So against sidewalk sales or exterior sales on private 27, 612, 6A, 1.198, 612, 6A. There's a few of them. You're right. The vast majority are the ones that you're mentioning, but there are a few in there that we'd want to keep in because those are the ones that would open up the ability to do the stuff we talked about today in the public right of way and outside. Essentially, the code right now is silent on sidewalk cafes or any outside except for special events. You have to keep your business within your 4 walls, and so everything we talked about today in the ordinance is outside your 4 walls. So those 4 or 5 we'd want to keep, I think.
If you talked about something in a commercial district, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you look here, if you can see my cursor, essentially from here to here, we want to keep.
So that 612 is kind of small on my screen. 612 through
A 8, 9, 11, and 612, 6B, and then literally everything above and next to it are mobile vending. And Michael, just to confirm, I think that would be okay, right?
Michael Farley.
Nothing else would interfere with the ordinance if we didn't.
Just to clarify, so if we were to remove all the mobile vending and farmers market, food truck suspensions of enforcement,
I don't think that conflicts with anything in the ordinance.
no, there might be some greater restrictions, but yeah, I don't think that directly conflicts.
Let me ask you another question. This is at 2 under chapter 32. How do those restrictions enumerated there that we want to remove impact residential areas, if at all?
Specific to residential, I don't think it's all. Essentially, we're waiving people's need to get a permit to sell outside as currently allowed. And most of those happen as special events. Again, you can only do X number of sidewalk sales a year. It does talk about food vending license fees. Again, they still have to get a business license, but there's a special license on top of that we were essentially waiving to encourage people to get in the business. And I don't think that would necessarily conflict with residential issues at all.
What about section 32-182? What is the meaning there? And in what circumstance are we talking about there? If we pulled that off by this resolution? It's the pedestrian traffic set aside of 72 inches.
That one is specifically to, we lax enforcement on that one so that we could minimize it to just the, let me get my math right. 12,
That's
40,
6 feet. But
the 48 inches for ADA requirement. This goes above and beyond ADA. And if you think of some of the sidewalks, some, not all, most are 5 feet wide, and those are mostly residential, but down some commercial corridors. In the more dense commercial areas, there are sidewalks that are 10, and then I think there's very few that are up to 15, like State Avenue downtown, Minnesota Avenue downtown. So we wanted to get the wiggle room to allow for both buffering of the ADA 4 feet, which is the requirement, federal requirement, and then still make room for the 6 feet of social distancing. So if you add those two up, you're pretty tight. If we were to go with the 72, we don't think there would be many places to do the sidewalk cafes. It shouldn't impact residential at all.
okay, let me give you, for instance, here, maybe that would help me. Let's say you have a little coffee donut shop in a residential area, or what do they call the TNB? Their residences around. The sidewalk is no more than 6 feet in front of it. What are we saying if we institute this resolution? And are we removing that so people can go outside and eat or what?
In that instance, they wouldn't have the clearance to provide a sidewalk cafe regardless. And so they would probably either push into one public space. Again, in more business districts, those are usually marked by stalls. But in that situation, it would probably not be marked, which is why we specifically note that the standard lot size is 7 by 18. And so they would have a 7 by 18 space in the street where a car would park that they could add a parklet.
But they could not impede the sidewalk.
In that instance, no, which is why we allowed that space in the street to be occupied potentially. That same business might have a front or side yard setback. The space between their building frontage and the sidewalk, or adjacent to their building, like over here potentially, or if you look at this picture potentially, this is very urban, but again, where they might be able to spill out into, but that's why we try to build the flexibility where, again, not everybody's going to have enough room on the sidewalk, so they could potentially go into the street. Not everybody's going to have on-street parking, but they might have side yard setbacks that they could flow into, and quite frankly, some people might not want to do any of those, but have off-street parking and feel like that's the most appropriate place to do it. So we tried to build that flexibility in there. If you can't do one, you could do others. Some businesses, just by the site constraints, will be able to potentially do all three if they so choose.
I guess the way the plain language of this reading, we're proposing this resolution to remove or temporarily suspend that section that calls for 72 inches. So
right,
that to me is a problem.
Again, I think we still allow ADA requirement. Most sidewalks in that situation aren't 6 feet. They're less than 5 feet, so that's not applying it anyway. And again, because of the other standards in the section, they wouldn't be able to impede in that sidewalk with parking, with a sidewalk cafe to begin with.
Okay. Well, if the proposal is to remove from this resolution anything that had to deal with residential districts, especially since we don't have anything in front of us that would give us more guidance, it's just, you know, removing the fetters. With reticence, I would go for that, but other than that, I think we should have had the resolution and the ordinance that dealt with 27 at the same time. But if that can be done, that we take out anything that pertains to the residential districts, then that's fine. But I surely hope in the future we get this stuff earlier than what we got it today to really look at it, to do our constituents right by them and right by those who have worked hard on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no more hands raised, I would entertain a motion to approve the COVID ordinance. Is there anyone who would like to bring a motion to approve the COVID ordinance?
Mayor, it's Commissioner Bynum. Are you referring to this ordinance in front of us? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Not anything about phase 3. It doesn't take much to confuse me at this point.
We have two things. We have the COVID-19, the ordinance, which expanding the ability of businesses and individuals to sell food, drinks, and merchandise on sidewalks, streets, parking lots, and parklets, adding new sections 32-100 to 32-103, and new sections 32-185 to 32-186 to Chapter 32, Article 3 of the 2008 Code of Ordinances and Resolutions of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
Mayor, I would move approval. This is Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. If I can get a second, someone raise their hand. Did we have a second from Commissioner Burrows? Did I hear that?
Yes, Mayor, you did.
Okay, thank you. So we have a second from Commissioner Burrows. Any discussion? Not seeing any. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Philbrook,
Aye.
Bynum,
Aye.
Burrows,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Ramirez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Kane,
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Okay, now we have, would require a motion to, for a resolution, basically due to the COVID-19 pandemic, enforcement of the following ordinances or portions of ordinances under Chapter 27 of the Unified Government Code of Ordinances is temporarily suspended until 11:59 p.m. December 31st, 2020. That would be number 27-609, 7A, 27-609, 7A.3, 27-609, 7A.3, Roman numeral I, and so on and so forth. There's multiple pages of that. Do I have a motion?
Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner Townsend.
this is Commissioner Townsend. My motion on the resolution would be to move the resolution forward with the exception of any language in the current resolution that applies to or deals with residential districts or the impact on that.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, this is Commissioner Bynum.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion?
Mayor, I'm sorry, this is Commissioner Burrows. I can't get to my hand raised quick enough. I apologize. Would Commissioner Townsend be kind enough to repeat her motion, please?
Sure, no problem. Commissioner, my motion, in effect, was to move forward with this resolution with the exception of any language that addressed residential districts. And that's primarily out of Chapter 27, 609 of the ordinance, and not exclusively that, but anything that dealt with the impact residential districts.
I believe
Mayor.
Mr. Hand is highlighting that on the screen for those that will be removed. Is that correct, Gunner?
As I understand it, yes.
All right. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
Commissioner Bynum seconded, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right. Any discussion? All right. Seeing none, roll call, please.
Roll call. Philbrook,
Aye.
Bynum,
Aye.
Burrows,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye. Hear me?
yes.
Aye.
Yes. McKiernan,
Aye.
Ramirez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Kane,
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
The vote is 9-0. That motion carries.
Thank you all. That concludes our meeting. We are adjourned.
Thank you.